Hi guys, welcome to Watercolor. So what I started with is a fresh sheet of paper in my sketchbook, which I went ahead and measured out into a little grid. We have 9 boxes here. They're 4 by 3. So what I did is I actually measured my paper this way, and I divided it into 3 sections. So here we have at 3 and at 6 I made 2 little tick marks. Did the same thing on this side at 3 and at 6, and then I made some nice lines across. Then going this way from the top and the bottom, I divided into 3 sections again, but this time they're 4 inches long. So at 4 and 8 I made 2 tick marks. Same here at 4 and at 8, and then I made 2 lines down. Okay, and then I labeled them, and you can see the list of everything that I labeled online, but it says wash, gradation wash, color change gradient, wet on wet, resist, dab, salt, drip, and backwash. Okay, now keep in mind that this is not watercolor paper, so these techniques aren't going to be perfect on this drawing paper that we have, but it's enough, you know, to kind of give us an idea of what we're doing. So I have all my supplies next to me. I have my little paper towel, or I just used a tissue, a piece of oil pastel, salt, a little palette, my water dish, 2 different brushes. I have a flat brush right here and a round brush, that's what we call those. And then I have my little watercolor palette. Now the reason I have this palette is because lots of us use this palette, so we want to keep it nice and clean, so we're not going to be doing our mixing here, okay? We're going to be doing our mixing there. So let's try some techniques. Starting with wash. Now wash is a wet on dry technique. That means that the paint is nice and wet, but my paper is dry. So I'm going to use my flat brush here. I'm going to put it in the water and choose a color. Let's go with it. I like to do blues. Put that in there. Let's get a little bit more water, a little bit more pigment. Mix that up. Okay. Now with a wash, what I'm going to try to do is get a nice even coat of one color across the whole little square. So getting the brush nice and wet, I'm just going to go right across, and I'm going to dip again and go half into what I just did and pull it down again and again and again and again. Okay, so hopefully I'm going to get a nice even spreading out of my pigments. Okay, now when that dries, you shouldn't have it be too streaky, and that will work better again on the watercolor paper. Okay, now the gradation wash is pretty much the same thing, except I'm going to go with less pigment as we go. So what I'm going to do, just to really show it, is to put a little bit more water in here and get a little bit more intense pigment. So let's make that really blue right there. Okay, now I leaked a little bit over into the next section, so I want to be careful because you don't want these to touch. In fact, if you want to, when you actually do it, go ahead and skip around. That might be a good idea. So what I'm going to do is get my brush nice and wet in the intense blue. I'm going to go ahead and just put that in like that. Then I'm going to do the same thing I did with the gradation, but each time I'm going to put my brush into clean water. So I'm actually getting rid of the pigment. So what will end up happening is we have nice dark on top, and it's going to go lighter and lighter and lighter. Okay, I may have used too much water, so keep that in mind. Okay, a color change gradation. That's when we do basically this, but then we change the color at the bottom. So let's get nice intense blue. I'm going to use less water this time. Right at the top. And then I'm going to lighten it up. I'm using just the water. Now once I get to here, I'm going to switch my color. I'm going to wash out my brush and go to a nice intense purple. Put that in. And then some clear water and some clear water. And hopefully you get a nice blend. Okay. Woohoo. Now that's weird. I don't know why it's doing that. Let's fix that. There we go. Okay. Now, wet on wet technique is interesting. This is really fun. The paper is already going to be wet, and the pigment is going to be nice and soppy wet too. So what we're going to do is actually just take some clear water and go ahead and make a little puddle of water. Then, using a wet brush, putting it into our color. If I touch that to the puddle I've already made, it's going to blend itself. See how it's starting to spread? Now you can add more water, make it do kind of interesting things. And then we can add a different color to that and see what happens. So you get this really beautiful, free tie-dye effect. It sort of does its own thing. But you will notice that once you put the pigment into the water, the pigment only goes where the water was, so it's not going to go into the dry section, so you don't have to worry about any bleeding. But you do want to be careful about your your analogous colors here, or no, sorry, your complementary colors. So red and green are complementary colors. When they get mixed together, do you know what's going to happen? Yeah, they turn muddy brown. Same with orange and blue, and yellow and purple. Okay, so when you're mixing, try to mix what we call analogous colors, which are colors that are next to each other in the color wheel. So red and orange are going to blend really well. Orange and yellow will blend. Yellow will blend with orange, and it will blend with green. It will also blend with red. Okay. Green will definitely blend with yellow and blue, even purple, but not with red. Okay. Moving on. Let's do a resist technique. Now this is kind of fun. There's a lot of different mediums that are specifically made to be painted on as a resist, but you can use something as simple as an oil pastel. I'm just going to write my name, and then look what happens when I paint on it. Resist means that it resists the water. You cannot paint on top of what you've done. It's like a little wax seal. Woohoo! Okay. Now the dabbing, this is interesting. This is a great effect for creating clouds. So let's use a blue. We'll do a nice wash. Squeeze some of that out. Then, using my tissue or paper towel, I can dab, pick it up a little bit, and you get almost like a cloud effect. Okay, and with a little bit more control and doing this less rushed than I am, you can have a really nice, beautiful effect. Okay, the next one is the funnest one, I think. It's the salt one. So I'm going to take, let's do the purple again. I like that, or blue purple. I'm going to do a wash of purple, nice and intense. Now the salt is just regular table salt. I'm going to pour it right on top of this. But the trick to doing this is to do it when it's still really nice and soppy wet. And what's going to happen is that salts, those little crystals of salt, are going to absorb the watercolor, and they're going to leave a kind of cool, textury look to it. Okay. Now, drip is fun. This is a very Jackson Pollock-y kind of look, and it's almost Halloween, so let's do red. So you want not a huge amount. If you want an intense drip of color, you don't want to add too much water, and that's kind of the trick to all of this. If you want it to be an intense color, you don't add a lot of water. If you want it to be very soft, then you add more water. Okay. So with drip, I have, actually, you know what? Let's try the other brush. Let's try our nice round brush. put it in the water and in the ink. I'm going to dry it a little bit. Okay, now just holding it right over, I'm going to squeeze it with my finger and we get a nice drip. Sometimes it just gets on your fingers, so you can just kind of do that, or you can do a nice controlled splash like that. Okay, looks a little gruesome, that's okay. All right, and then the final one is what we call a backwash. You can do this with just plain water, or you can actually do this with rubbing alcohol. The effects are the same. You're going to do a wash of color, kind of intense. Leave that for a sec. And then if you get a wet brush with pretty much clean water, I mean, mine's kind of dirty, but it doesn't really matter, and you pour it right, you let it drip right onto the wash you just made, you'll see that the new water pushes the old water back, and you get kind of a weird tie-dye effect. So you can do this with clear water, or like I said, rubbing alcohol. It does the same thing. It pushes the pigment away. All right. Now there are a ton of different watercolor techniques. So if you want to try more than this, you're welcome to go online. YouTube has a million tutorials on this. You can find one and experiment for yourself. But this is just sort of the basics of what I expect you to understand. Okay. Have fun.